They say every great spy has three things: charm, cunning, and a knack for getting out of impossible situations. Sidney Reilly didn't just have those, he practically wrote the manual. He was the kind of guy who could steal your secrets, your heart, and probably your wallet, all while convincing you it was your idea. His life wasn't just a spy story. It was the spy story, the blueprint for every suave secret agent we know today. But here's the kicker. No one really knows who Sidney Reilly was. Was he born in Odessa, Ireland? Was his name Sigmund Rosenblum? Georgie Rosenberg? He left behind more questions than answers, and that's exactly how he liked it. The only thing everyone agrees on is that Sidney Reilly was a man you didn't forget, and for good reason. Reilly's early years were a patchwork of mystery and reinvention. He was allegedly born in 1874 in Odessa, Ukraine, to a modest Jewish family. Or maybe it was in Ireland, as some other accounts suggest. Then again, there are claims that his father was a Russian Orthodox nobleman. The truth? Nobody knows, and honestly, it doesn't matter. What we do know is that young Sidney, or Sigmund, as he was originally called, had a talent for survival. From an early age, he mastered the art of blending in, adapting to whatever situation life threw at him. By his teens, Sidney was already showing signs of the audacious man he'd become. He was fluent in multiple languages, a skill that would become his superpower. Whether he was in a smoky tavern in Odessa or mingling with high society in Vienna, Sidney could slip into a conversation as easily as slipping on a new coat. And speaking of new coats, he had a knack for reinventing himself. One day, he was Sigmund the translator. The next, he was a budding entrepreneur. Or so he claimed. Hooked already? Smash that subscribe button and stick with Talescape. Things really kicked off for Sidney in his 20s when he found himself mixed up in, let's say, less than legal activities. Smuggling goods across borders? Check. Forging documents? Double check. Sidney wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, and he wasn't picky about how he got ahead. Somewhere during his escapades, he caught the attention of British intelligence. Now, MI6 wasn't exactly advertising job openings, but Sidney had all the qualifications they didn't know they were looking for: charm, guts, and absolutely no respect for rules. His first big mission? Persia. The British government wanted control of Persian oil, and Sidney was the man for the job. Armed with nothing but his wits and a suitcase full of nerve, he brokered a deal that handed Britain access to one of the most lucrative oil fields in the world. How did he pull it off? Let's just say Sidney had a way of convincing people. Some say it was his charisma. Others think there might have been a few bribes involved. Either way, Sidney delivered, and the British were thrilled. But Reilly wasn't just about oil deals. In Germany, he infiltrated naval operations and walked out with secrets that gave Britain a major advantage in World War I. Imagine strolling into enemy territory, pretending to be their best friend, and then leaving with their playbook. That was Sidney's style: bold, reckless, and somehow always successful. By this point, Sidney's reputation was growing. He was no longer just a spy. He was the spy, the guy who could do the impossible. Need someone to sweet-talk their way into a secure facility? Sidney. Need someone to bluff their way past armed guards? Sidney again. He was a one-man spy network, and he loved every second of it. By the early 1900s, Sidney Reilly wasn't just a spy. He was a legend in the making. His reputation had spread across Europe, and whispers about the man of 1,000 faces started to sound more like myth than fact. But Sidney wasn't about to slow down. His missions only got bolder, his methods more daring, and his life more dangerous. One of Sidney's most infamous exploits was in St. Petersburg, Russia, where he embedded himself deep within the political circles of the Tsarist regime. His target? Military secrets. His strategy? Classic Reilly: charm, cunning, and just enough audacity to make you wonder if he secretly enjoyed the thrill more than the paycheck. He posed as an arms dealer, forging connections with officials who thought they were talking to a trusted ally. Little did they know, Sidney was collecting every scrap of intelligence and shipping it straight to British intelligence. But espionage wasn't just about gathering secrets. Sidney's true genius lay in his ability to manipulate entire situations. For example, during one mission, he orchestrated a deal to sell weapons to opposing factions, effectively controlling both sides of the conflict. It wasn't just spying. It was playing chess on a global scale, and Sidney was always 3 moves ahead. Then came the mission that would cement Sidney's place in espionage history, the Lockhart Plot. It was 1918, and the world was still reeling from the Russian Revolution. Lenin and his Bolsheviks had seized power, and the British were desperate to destabilize the new regime. Enter Sidney Reilly, who was tasked with nothing short of toppling the Soviet government. Now, you'd think organizing a coup would involve months of planning, countless resources, and an army of operatives. Not for Sidney. Armed with little more than his signature swagger and a handful of contacts, he infiltrated the highest levels of Soviet power. Sidney posed as a supporter of the Bolsheviks, worming his way into their inner circle with promises of loyalty. Behind the scenes, he worked tirelessly to rally opposition forces, bribing officials, sowing dissent, and plotting to overthrow Lenin himself. The plan? Bold doesn't even begin to describe it. Sidney intended to assassinate Lenin and other key Bolshevik leaders during a meeting, effectively decapitating the regime in one swift move. It was the kind of scheme that sounds more like a blockbuster film than real life. But here's the thing about audacious plans. They don't always work. The plot was betrayed by an informant, and the Soviet secret police, the Cheka, were on Sidney's trail. Realizing the operation had been compromised, Sidney barely escaped with his life. It was a rare failure for the Ace of Spies, but it only added to his mystique. The Lockhart Plot may not have succeeded, but it solidified Sidney's reputation as a man willing to risk everything for the mission. While most spies would have gone into hiding after such a close call, Sidney doubled down, taking on even more dangerous assignments. For him, espionage wasn't just a job, it was an obsession. After the chaos of the Lockhart Plot, Sidney Reilly didn't just disappear into the shadows, he thrived in them. His name became a legend whispered in the corridors of power and the dark alleys of espionage. But with notoriety came danger, and Sidney's life was about to take a turn no one saw coming. The 1920s marked a new chapter for Reilly. With the Bolsheviks firmly in control of Russia, Reilly became one of their most wanted men. His role in the attempted coup had painted a giant target on his back. But did Sidney lie low? Of course not. He dove deeper into anti-Bolshevik activities, traveling across Europe to rally support against the Soviet regime. One of his boldest ventures during this time was his involvement in Operation Trust, a counterintelligence operation launched by the Soviet secret police, the Cheka. The Soviets set up a fake monarchist organization, claiming to be an underground resistance movement against the Bolsheviks. Their goal? To lure anti-Bolshevik operatives out of hiding. And who was their ultimate prize? None other than Sidney Reilly. Reilly, ever the gambler, took the bait. In 1925, he was lured back to Soviet territory under the pretense of meeting with fellow resistance leaders. But the moment he crossed the border, the trap was sprung. Reilly was captured by the Cheka and thrown into Lubyanka prison, the infamous fortress of Soviet intelligence. Now, you'd think Sidney would be terrified, but if there's one thing he was known for, it was his nerve. While in custody, Reilly reportedly tried to negotiate with his captors, offering to work as a double agent. It's the kind of audacity only Sidney Reilly could muster, trying to turn the tables on the very people who had captured him. But the Soviets weren't playing games. On November 5, 1925, Sidney Reilly was executed in a forest outside Moscow. Or was he? That's the thing about Sidney. His death is as shrouded in mystery as his life. Some say he was shot by a Soviet firing squad. Others claim he escaped and lived under an assumed identity. There's even a theory that British intelligence orchestrated his disappearance to protect him from further threats. What we do know is that Sidney Reilly's legacy didn't die with him. His life of intrigue and danger became the blueprint for modern espionage. Ian Fleming himself cited Reilly as an inspiration for James Bond, the ultimate fictional spy. And honestly, it's easy to see why. Reilly was suave, fearless, and always one step ahead, until the day he wasn't. Sidney Reilly's story is a reminder that the world of espionage is as thrilling as it is treacherous. He lived a life most people can only dream about, or have nightmares over, and left behind a legacy that continues to captivate. So the next time you watch a spy movie, just remember, before Bond, there was Reilly. Thanks for tuning into Talescape. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories where history and mystery collide in the most extraordinary ways.